Hi everyone, welcome to parts 2 to 4 of the poem Out of the Bag. So getting straight into it, at the start of stanza 2, we get a clear shift in narration. So in part 1, I talked about the child-like voice of the narrator, the idea that perhaps this was Heaney when he was a child, peering through the door when his mum was giving birth to his 8 siblings. So we've shifted in time, we've now got the adult narrator, an educated adult narrator. And that's very, very clear to us immediately because it starts with Latin. Poeta doctus Peter Levi. So poeta doctus literally means doctor of poetry. And Heaney is starting to talk about some other well-known poets or poetry scholars at least with Peter Levi. So doctor of poetry, Peter Levi says, sanctuaries of Asclepiades, called Asclepions, with the equivalent of hospitals in ancient Greece. So Heaney starts to tell us that this poetry scholar, Peter Levi, has once said that these sanctuaries of Asclepius, which is the Greek god of healing, so sanctuaries of healing were the equivalent of hospitals. So in ancient Greece, they had these things called the sanctuaries of healing, and they are what we call hospitals today. So we start to get this idea of an educated adult narrator. And then they continue with that idea, or what some people would say are like hospitals, are places like Lourdes, holy places of pilgrimage, which are designed to heal people. So another poeta doctus, another doctor of poetry, this time Graves, Robert Graves, that's what he has said. So first of all, doctor of poetry Peter Levi has said that the sanctuaries of healing were like hospitals. Now we've got Robert Graves, who has said that Lourdes is like a hospital. And then actually Heaney decides to place himself along with these other very famous poets. And he says, or the cure of poetry. And then the next stanza, say I. So if Levi has said that sanctuaries of healing in ancient Greece were like hospitals, and if Graves has said that Lourdes is like a hospital, then Heaney is saying that poetry can cure and can heal and is like a hospital as well. So we get now clearly the sense that this is an autobiographical poem. This is about Heaney himself, and this is what Heaney has said. And then he talks about when he realised this. So he kind of goes back in time to a time when he was travelling to a place called Epidaurus, which is in Greece. And it was a place of healing. It was a sanctuary for healing. And then as it became very, very popular, it grew, and it had things like theatres there as well. So he when he visited this place, he had this kind of realization, actually, that poetry can cure, which is why this place, which began as a kind of a place of healing for sick people, why they then built a theatre there, because they believed in the power of entertainment to heal. So we realised that whole place was a sanatorium. So a sanatorium is a place where people go when they're very, very ill. But as I said, they built the theatre, the gymnasium, the baths, the more popular this place becomes. This is a picture of it here, a picture of the great theatre. So they really, really kind of developed this into a healing complex. And so it dawned on Heaney when he was there that poetry really, really can cure people and can help people. He calls it a site of incubation. And here, like in some of the other poems, we get a bit of wordplay, I suppose, because Heaney talks about sort of dual meanings of the word incubation, or tells us about kind of the modern interpretation of the word incubation, but also takes us back to the Latin original. So a site of incubation. So our modern interpretation of incubation and an incubation period is a time when you are ill. And so in Epidaurus, people who are sick went there for incubation for a period of time. However, the Latin original from incubare meant to lie down in a place of worship, in a temple, and to be spoken to by God. That was the original meaning of the word incubare, which incubate comes from. So he talks about the place, Epidaurus, being a place where people went when they were sick, and what they were hoping for was to go to sleep in this sacred place and then have that epiphany. So again, here the meaning of epiphany, meaning being spoken to by God. And you met the God. So that was the hope in this place Epidaurus. Now, quite deliberately, we've got ellipses at the end of this stanza, and arguably that could be quite ambiguous in terms of the interpretation. Are we meant to believe that these people went to Epidaurus and they were met by God, and they lived happily ever after? They were healed. Is the ellipsis to convey that? Or perhaps is it to convey that they perhaps met God, their maker, in the afterlife because their life ended? So it's not clear. It's ambiguous. Ellipsis, though, to make us think and pause at that point, and it kind of ends that section of part 2 of the poem. So then we have a new section in the following stanza, where this time, and it's like a stream of consciousness, this poem for Heaney. He first of all was telling us about a memory of a child when he was outside the room where his mum was giving birth, and then he tells us about the time he was at Epidaurus, and now he's going to tell us about a time when he was at Lourdes in a procession. So obviously Heaney grew up as a Catholic, so there's a lot of kind of religious imagery and iconography in this poem. So he talks about when he was in Lourdes and he was hatless and groggy, shadowing myself as the thoroughfare. I was in an open air procession in Lourdes in 56. So the thoroughfare is the person who carries that smoky machine that you might have seen if you've ever been to a Catholic church or a high Anglican church. So that was his role in the procession, was to swing the incense, essentially, which was believed to kind of, cleanse the environment and that sort of thing. So he was there, but it's an open air procession, presumably a hot day, and he hasn't got a hat, and he's feeling quite groggy. He's feeling a little bit of kind of heat stroke, basically, as he's walking with this smoke churn. And so he nearly fainted because of the heat and the fumes. So that's the memory that he's taking us back to. And then we've got the comma, which this comma is used throughout this poem as kind of breaks in lines of thoughts, a bit like a full stop. And in fact, he goes from thinking about that time where he nearly fainted in Lourdes to another time when he nearly fainted. Again, I nearly fainted as I bent to pull a bunch of grass and hallucinated. Now, it's not clear at this moment why he's bending to pick a bunch of grass, but it will become clearer later on in the poem. But essentially, he remembers another time when he fainted. And in this particular time when he fainted, he had this quite unusual hallucination. This hallucination connects the different parts of the poem together. So his hallucination was of Dr. Curlin, the doctor who was in stanza 1, the one who came and delivered the babies in the Heaney household. So Dr. Curlin, in his hallucination, is at the steamed-up glass of our scullery window, starting in to draw with his large pink index finger dot-faced men. So where we had the rosy description of Dr. Curlin in first stanza, or first part of the poem, sorry, now we've also got the reference to the colour, the pink. So there are moments in this poem when Heaney goes back and forth and links the different parts together. And say, in this hallucination, he is imagining, or he's hallucinating about Dr. Curlin drawing people in the steam of the glass, of the steamed-up window. And he continues with this idea of Dr. Curlin drawing the people. And they've got droopy sausage arms and legs, so kind of quite childlike drawing, perhaps. And that soon began to run. So in his hallucination, those drawings come to life and the people start running, which could be symbolic of kind of people coming to life. And it links back to the first part of this poem, which is all about Dr. Curlin coming to this household and delivering these babies, and therefore, bringing life into the world. And then as he dipped and larded in the generous suds again, so we've got the link back to him washing his hands that he would have done after he delivered the child. Miraculum, so the Latin for miracle, the baby bits all come together swimming. So in his hallucination, all of a sudden, there's a baby in the hands of the doctor. So going back to that childlike notion of part 1, where the child didn't quite understand where the babies come from. The doctor arrived with a bag, and when he left, there was a baby. So that childlike narrator thinking that the baby came out of the bag, hence the title of the poem, Out of the Bag. So yeah, into his soapy big hands, there is this baby. And I myself came to, and that's when he woke up out of his hallucination. And he was blinded with sweat, blinking and shaky in the windless light. So perhaps the verbs blinded, blinking, shaky. They suggested it was a kind of quite profound moment, a strange hallucination, that time when he fainted and what it made him think about. And maybe then there's a message in the poem that this poem perhaps is about how important womanhood is, how important childbirth is, how strong and wonderful women are, and how in fact that's probably the most miraculous thing that we have in this world, perhaps more so than these religious pilgrimages that Heaney had been on, is one possible interpretation of the poem. The fact that it ends this stanza with the idea of light, though, is suggesting that is a positive moment. So that thought perhaps is welcome and is calming and is peaceful. It's a windless light as well. So this isn't shaking the very foundations of Heaney's soul. This is quite a welcome idea for him. Okay, so that's part 2, and now we're going to move straight on to part 3 of the poem as well. And it goes back to that grass. So it wasn't clear why he was picking grass, and now it becomes clearer in part 3 why he was picking the grass before he fainted that time. So bits of the grass I pulled, I posted off to one going into chemotherapy and one who would come through. So the reason that Heaney is picking grass and where he's picking grass is actually now back in Epidaurus. So it takes us back again into the poem to that place in Greece, because it was the tradition and the belief that if you picked the grass of Epidaurus and you posted it to people who were sick, it would make them better. So that explains why he was kind of picking the grass before he had that hallucination. I didn't want, the lines are in Jean, and lots of these poems that we've looked at, I didn't want to leave the place or link up with the others. So we're told quite clearly that Heaney enjoyed being at Epidaurus, and he enjoyed this moment, and he didn't want it to end. He didn't want to leave the place. He didn't want to link up, presumably, with the other pilgrims who were on this pilgrimage. It was midday, mid-May, pre-tourist sunlight in the precincts of the gods. So this stanza's got a really kind of joyful tone, and that's perhaps enhanced by that internal rhyme of midday, mid-May. It creates kind of nice sound and nice rhythm, and suggests that he was enjoying his time at Epidaurus in the precincts of the god, before the tourists come. It's quite a special moment, and he looks back on it perhaps with romanticism and nostalgia, like lots of the other poems as well. There seems to be a wonderful time and moment in Epidaurus. The very site of the temple of Asclepius. So again, just reminding us of where he is, this place of healing, the god of healing. I wanted nothing more than to lie down under hogweed under seeded grass. So that tone of euphoria, of joy, continues from the previous stanza. We get the sense of Heaney really, really desiring to be in this place. I wanted nothing more than to lie down and continue with these Christian rituals. Some people have found the idea of the hogweed perplexing, because apparently hogweed makes you blister, but probably we're also familiar with the idea of the Catholic religion sometimes being a punishing religion, and there being beliefs that if you kind of punish yourself and sacrifice yourself, then you can become closer to God. So it doesn't seem too far a stretch to understand why he might say that he wants to lie down excuse me, under the hogweed or under the seeded grass. But he talks about really embracing this time in Epidaurus and on this pilgrimage that he's on. And that continues again to the next stanza. And to be visited in the very eye of the day by Hygeia, his daughter, her name still clarifying the haven of light she was, the undarkening door. So he talks about wanting to be visited by this time the god Hygeia, so the god of hygiene. The idea that he was embracing this pilgrimage, that he had gone there perhaps to be cleansed spiritually. And again, he was enjoying it, he was welcoming it, and again, this positive light imagery, and again, another link back to part 1 of the poem, where we had in part 1 of the poem, Dr. Curlin who darkened the door, and I talked about my interpretation of that line being the fact that the childlike narrator didn't quite understand that phrase, although you could interpret it other ways and perhaps suggest that the doctor was a not entirely wholesome presence in the house. But for me, it's a misunderstanding. The child doesn't understand that phrase. Here we've got the adult narrator. They do understand that phrase. And actually they're twisting the phrase on its head, and they're saying that this experience is undarkening their doors. So it's given them a sense of enlightenment, a sense of epiphany. So Heaney enjoying this pilgrimage to Epidaurus. And then finally, part 4. So part 4, interestingly, takes us right back to the start of the poem, right back to the room where the babies have all been delivered, the room I came from, and the rest of us all came from. So remember, the opening line of part 1 is the idea that we all came in Dr. Curlin's bag. So that childlike notion that when the doctor arrived with his bag, he left, there was a baby, therefore the babies came in the bag. But that room, to Heaney, stays pure reality. So this is perhaps his most clear and vivid memory, being in that room or being outside that room, and then later in that room when his mum was giving birth to one of his 8 siblings. Remember, he's the oldest of 9 children. Where I stand alone, standing the passage of time, and she's asleep. So again, this idea that this memory has stood the passage of time. He can remember this very, very clearly, very, very vividly. And the she is his mum, who is asleep. She's just given birth to presumably one of Heaney's siblings, and so she's tired, and he's there. And this time, he's in the room. He's not outside the room. He's in the room by his side, which will tell us shortly. Talks about the fact that she is in sheets put on for the doctor, wedding presents that showed up again and again. So the idea, like we had in the first part of this poem, that the doctor being somebody who's very, very important, and the idea of kind of these people putting on a show for the doctor because the doctor was this refined gentleman, and therefore they put out the best sheets for when the doctor came, even perhaps though ultimately the lady was going to give birth. Those sheets that were wedding presents are kind of the importance of those sheets. And they showed up again and again. So perhaps here, just Heaney alluding to the idea of coming from a very, very big family. And this was an experience that happened again and again. 8 brothers and sisters, therefore at least 8 times for him to be a part of or to watch. Unusual and useful at births and deaths. So we get the internal rhyme of usual and useful, again creating that rhythm, perhaps to try and convey the idea of things being cyclical, which is then also furthered with the idea of births and deaths in the same line, that life is a cycle, and we have this repetitive cycle of births and deaths and births and deaths, and things moving on over time. So here now is where we're told that Heaney is at the bedside. So perhaps, he's a bit older now, maybe this is one of the much younger siblings of his, and he's in the room, he's not outside the door. Me at the bedside, incubating for real. So again, we get that word incubating, is meaning lying down for real, lying down at his mum's bedside. Or is this about the idea of if incubation was to be touched by God? Is this making the point that actually being in this very, very special moment, childbirth, is like being touched by God, that actually this experience and women giving birth is the most miraculous thing that we have in the world? Is it that idea? Because it's for real. So perhaps contrast with the other ideas, and maybe the ideas of the belief in the doctor and medicine and the belief in religion are not as real as this moment that Heaney is now in. So he is appearing to her as she closes and opens her eyes. So we get this close connection, Heaney and his mum in the same visual image, showing their unity as father and son. And he's there, so she's in this kind of drowsy state after giving birth. And she is in a faraway smile, so it suggests this kind of a peaceful moment and a joyful moment, bringing more children into this family, whose precinct of vision I would enter every time. So again, the idea that Heaney understands that this is a special moment, and he would enter it every time. It's got that desire to be here with his mother. Like in the previous parts of the poem, he had the desire to be in Epidaurus and want to be touched by the god Hygeia, but he would enter this moment every time to be with his mum, to assist. So he likes perhaps the fact that he is part of this, that he can help, and be asked in that hoarsened whisper of triumph. So obviously the hoarsened whisper is his mum's voice after she's just given birth, quite tired. But it's also a voice of triumph. So the idea that she has been victorious here, she's achieved something remarkable, that she is a strong woman who's brought life into the world. And then it ends with the mother's voice, so the speech. And what do you think of the new wee baby the doctor brought for us all when I was asleep? And it takes us really nicely back to the first part of the poem, and that idea, that sort of pretense perhaps that they all kept up, the idea that, you know, the mum is saying, well, what do you think of the baby that the doctor brought, and playing on the idea that the doctor came with his bag, when he left there was a baby, so therefore the doctor brought the baby in that bag. So Heaney's mum asking Heaney, what do you think of the new baby that the doctor's brought? But I suppose you could also interpret it in some other ways as well, that perhaps it's her being quite humble, quite modest. You know, she's done this remarkable thing. She's given birth, she's brought a new life into the world, and yet she doesn't take any praise herself. All the praise is for the doctor. So perhaps, again, there's a point there that Heaney is making, and perhaps this poem is about giving credit to the women who bring life into the world, and how amazing and miraculous that is, as I said, compared to perhaps the belief that we have in doctors, the belief that we have in science, and the belief that we have in religion. So that's it. That's out of the bag. I hope you enjoyed. Oh my God. Oh my God.